Welcome back. So we've already created a uCapsule component pointer and forward declared it, so we didn't have to include the header file in basepawn.h. It's now time to actually construct a capsule component subobject for our base pawn. And once we do that, we're going to set our root component to be the capsule. So how do we actually construct a uCapsule component? The process is very Unreal Engine specific. Unreal Engine has create default subobject. This is a template function. A template function adapts to the type chosen, so we can choose a particular type and create default subobject will adapt to that type. We pass in the type that we wish to construct into create default subobject. Unlike a regular function, it has these angle brackets. This is where we pass in the type to construct. Now, create default subobject also takes an argument in its parentheses. This is going to be a name that we assign to the subobject. This is different than the variable name, and it's passed in as a string literal. So here's an example. Let's say we wish to create a uStaticMesh component. So we call create default subobject, and in the angle brackets, we pass in the type uStaticMesh component. And in the parentheses, we give it a name. Now, you've already seen that for string literals, you should use the text macro, so we're passing our string literal in using the text macro here. Now, as I mentioned, this is an internal name used by Unreal Engine. There are other functions that use this. For example, there's a function called getDefaultSubObjectByName. It retrieves a subobject belonging to a particular object, and you can call it passing in a particular name, and it'll look for the subobject with that chosen name. So the overall function call to create default subobject looks like this. The type goes in the angle brackets and the name goes in the parentheses. Now create default subobject returns the address of the newly created component. So in our case, if we passed in uStaticMesh component as the type, then we get the address of a uStaticMesh component, and we can store that in a pointer since pointers store addresses of things. So say we create a uStaticMesh component pointer called mesh. Then we can take that address returned by create default subobject and store that address in our mesh pointer. So now that you know how create default subobject works, you're going to use this to construct a capsule component object. You're going to do this in the base pawn constructor. Use create default subobject to construct a capsule component. Pass in uCapsule component in the angle brackets as the type to construct, and pass in Capsule Collider wrapped in a text macro in the parentheses. Pause the video and add this to basepawn.cpp in the constructor now. Okay, so we're here in basepawn.cpp, and we'd like to construct a capsule component. So we're going to take our capsule comp variable and assign the value returned by create default subobject. Now, as we've seen, this template function has angle brackets as well as parentheses. And we saw that the type goes in the angle brackets. We're going to use uCapsule component. And for the parentheses, we're going to use the text macro, and we're going to call this Capsule Collider. And there we go. Now we're using uCapsule component to construct an object of this type, and when we use a type, we include its header file. Now, attempting to compile this, here we get a different error than the one we saw in the last video, use of undefined type uCapsule component. This time, we're trying to use the uCapsule component type here in the CPP file to construct an object. Here's the error code in case you wish to Google this particular type of error for more information. So now we've seen two different types of compilation errors in this section of the course, and we know the cause of this particular error. We haven't included uCapsule component. Now here's uCapsule component in Unreal Engine's documentation, and here's the include that we need for this type. So I'm going to copy this and paste it here at the top of basepawn.cpp. Now if I attempt to compile again, compilation is successful. We see no errors. I'm going to close the terminal now. So we've created the capsule component. The next thing I'd like to do is make sure the capsule component is the root. Now we saw how to assign a component as the root in Blueprints by clicking and dragging. In C++, it's also pretty easy. We simply take that root component variable and assign it the value of capsule comp. Now we've specified that capsule comp should be the root component. Let's compile this again. And now, after a successful compilation, I'd like to hop back into the editor. If you already have your editor open, I suggest you close it and open it back up. Okay, I've opened up the editor, and I'm going to take my base pawn C++ class and drag one in. And now, check this out. We see a capsule component. Now, in the world outliner, it shows that the base pawn that I just dragged in is selected. Now, just above search details in the details panel, I can drag this down and see all components on this base pawn. And all we see is this capsule comp because that's the only component that it has. So we've now added our capsule component, and we see the result of that when we actually add an instance of this class into the world in the Unreal Engine editor. So in summary, we've learned how to construct a capsule component from C++, and we made it the root component by assigning the value of the root component variable to capsule comp. In the next video, we're going to add more components to our base pawn C++ class. I'll see you then.